decision on the case in front of us this evening. To my left are officers who will be presenting the report and also offering us advice. And they are led this evening by the Director of Planning and Place, Amanda Reid, who is the lady sitting on my immediate left. Okay. If we can start by noting, first of all, the membership of the committee. The Council AGM, as you may well know, was just a few weeks ago. And if we can note the chairman and vice chairman of the committee, so if that can be noted. Can I ask other apologies for absence? Mr. Tran.
Councillor Hargreaves?
Yes. Councillor Hargreaves, I'm afraid, is overseas on business, and his alternate, Councillor Aretti, is also actually overseas on business as well. So as a result, there are 4 members sitting this evening, and that's entirely in order in terms of the Constitution. Can I ask declarations of interest? Are there any declarations? There are none. Are there any other declarations? I think I should mention that, as again, many of you will know, I live actually quite close to the application site, and I know many of the people who have made representations, but I've not expressed a clear view, and I've got an open mind, and I'm happy to hear what people have to say this evening. So I'm content to chair this meeting. But I think that's important that I should note that. If we can just move on, the next item is, I think we need to formally approve, colleagues, the minutes of the meeting that were held on the 15th of March. Can I ask that we approve those minutes? I think Tom and Emma, you were present that evening. Is that agreed? Okay, that's agreed. Thank you very much. Sign those minutes. And also, I think in a formal way, we perhaps have to agree the special meeting of the committee that was part of the Council AGM on the 25th of May. Is that also agreed? Great. Thank you. Good. Well, in that case, I think we can move on to the main item of business, which is consideration of the application for development at Avon House. And I think Sarah Gentry, Sarah, you're going to present this, aren't you? So please, go ahead when you're ready.
Thank you. So the application concerns Avon House, which is on the eastern side of Allen Street within the Edward Square, Scarsdale and Abingdon Conservation Area. The flat roof of the existing care home building of Avon House is shown in this aerial photograph. The former home provided 35 bedrooms and has been vacant since 2014. The footprint of the existing building includes a setback to the rear and a courtyard to the southern boundaries facing onto Abingdon Court. Within this courtyard is located the Tree of Heaven, which the proposal includes its removal. To the north of Avon House is the Grade 2 Kensington United Reformed Church. This has residential properties to the rear, known as 16 Allen Street, which overlook the site. Moving round to the east of the site are the residential properties of 26 and 28 Adam and Eve Mews, and the rear of the Territorial Army Building Centre, accessed from Iverna Gardens. And to the south of Avon House is Abingdon Court, which overlooks the site. This photograph shows the existing front elevation of the building that was built in the 1970s. It is a simple, rendered design that does not reflect the character of the surrounding properties. You will note that there is a setback from the street and that the area to the frontage is used for parking with no boundary treatment. This drawing shows the existing building in its context. The existing building has a basement level, ground, first and second floors. You will note that the existing building is lower than the height of the surrounding buildings. In this photograph, you can see the existing Avon House looking from the north of Allen Street, showing the relationship of the existing building with the listed church, which dates from 1854. You will note the grand elevation of the church with portico and columns. And this photograph also shows the large tree in the grounds of Abingdon Court, along with trees beside the church and Avon House, which would be retained in the proposal. There are views through to the existing southern elevation of Avon House, shown in this photograph. You can also see the tree which is proposed to be retained to the left of the photograph, and also the Tree of Heaven, which is located within Avon House, which is proposed to be removed, which is just to the right of the photo. This is also shown looking from the other direction, from the south of Abingdon Court. You can see there views through to the Tree of Heaven. And this photograph shows a view from one of the flats of Abingdon Court, looking onto the site to the southern courtyard of Avon House. Moving round to the rear of the site, this is the rear area there is a high brick wall to the Territorial Army building and the properties within Adam and Eve Mews. And these properties have a roof terrace which front onto the site. Moving round to the north of the site, this is the residential property of 16 Allen Street, to the rear of the church, which has windows facing onto Avon House and a terrace at first floor level. And then finally, this photograph shows the relationship between the side elevation of the church and the side elevation of Avon House. The proposal under consideration tonight is the demolition of the existing care home to create a 40-bedroom home. It would have communal facilities and provide nursing and end-of-life care to older people with a range of needs, including dementia. The new building would have a sub-basement, basement floor, ground floor and 3 upper floors, with plant located on the 3rd floor. As set out within the officer's report, committee members should be aware of a 2016 permission for a 24-bedroom neurological facility, which included 2 basement levels. This permission has been implemented and so can be built out. Permission was then refused for a scheme for a care home in September 2020. The reason for refusal was that the scale and form of the building would have a significant impact upon the living conditions of surrounding properties, in particular 16 Allen Street, by reason of loss of daylight and increased sense of enclosure. It should be noted that the previous scheme included the removal of the Tree of Heaven, but this was not a specific reason for refusal. The new building would maintain the setback to the street with a welcome new boundary and railings, improving the appearance of the forecourt. In terms of height, the new building would appear as 1 story higher than the existing building, with the new parapet height sitting no higher than the cornice level of the church portico. The front elevation would be of a simple classical style with stucco render and timber sash windows to respect the dominance of the listed church. The building would have a side wing that would be set back slightly from the main front elevation, which is also illustrated in these visuals here. In In terms of height, the proposed new building would have an additional floor of accommodation at third floor level. For the most part, the building would comprise 2 basement floors, a ground floor level and 3 floors above, with the ground floor to the rear part of the building partially set below pavement level. The front part of the building to Allen Street would have a double height ground floor at street level and then 2 floors above. This is the ground floor plan. At ground floor level, the new building would follow the general footprint of the existing building with a Lightwell courtyard to the south and to the rear. This necessitates the removal of the Tree of Heaven and 3 other trees to the rear of the site. The proposal would retain some ground level to the south of the Lightwell for planting, and 2 silver birch trees are proposed. At lower ground floor level, there would be the main courtyard. This would have bedrooms fronting onto it, with other bedrooms looking onto the landscaped flat roof to the rear. There is an existing basement level to the existing building, and this proposed basement would be an extension of this existing basement floor. The lower basement beneath this would be one additional level of basement compared to the existing, and this would contain plant and equipment along with the kitchen and ancillary facilities. Moving up to the first floor, there's proposed to be a terrace to the rear, and also there would be flat roofs which would be planted and non-accessible. At second floor level, there would be more bedrooms and communal space. And then moving up to third floor level, this would be set back on the southern elevation and would contain the main communal lounge along with plant and equipment. This plant and equipment would be fully enclosed within the third floor space, and the plant would be subject to a recommended condition to ensure that there would not be any noise nuisance to the occupiers of neighbouring properties. The Council's Environmental Health Officer is satisfied that the plant would not be audible. And this level also does contain the main accessible external roof space, which is shown by the circle on the diagram there. Apart from part of the main third floor roof and the first floor terrace, the other flat roofs to the building would be non-accessible planted roofs designed to enhance biodiversity and would include tree planting in pots, climbing plants and bird boxes. PV panels would be placed on the main roof level. The proposal includes sustainable urban drainage measures in the form of blue and green roofs, which would ensure that the flooding risk would not be increased as a result of the proposal, since runoff rates on the site would be reduced. The proposal would also comply with other environmental standards, including a reduction in carbon emissions on site, as set out within the officer's report. This is the south elevation fronting onto Abingdon Court, showing the courtyard that would be at lower ground floor level. And you'll note that to the rear of the building, there would be a stepped profile, which has resulted from the need to set the building back on different levels to ensure that the daylighting levels to Abingdon Court are maintained. The louvres to the plant enclosure at third floor level would be located to the rear part of the site, as indicated on the slide with the arrow louvres. These would be visible from Allen Street, but would be set back on the site and partially screened by trees. The stepped profile and these louvres are the main element of the design that is viewed as a compromise that would result in less than substantial harm to the character and appearance of the conservation area. This has come about as a result of the need to ensure that the functional requirements of the building as a care home are met, including the intensive need for plant and equipment, along with maintaining light levels to neighbours. The proposed rear elevation, fronting onto Adam and Eve Mews, would be largely hidden from views. There would be the roof terrace at first floor level with screens to that first floor terrace and the upper roof terrace. This is the elevation fronting onto 16 Allen Street and the church. This includes further louvers to the plant at third floor level on this side elevation. These would be set back from the street to reduce their visibility, but are likely to be glimpsed in some views from Allen Street. The building is also set down at the rear opposite 16 Allen Street. The reduction in massing of the building has been to address the reason for refusal of the 2020 scheme, which related to loss of light and increased sense of enclosure. This shows the 3D image of the existing building, which is set back on the elevations and is 3 stories high. This is the model of the refuse scheme, which had a cutaway on the northeastern corner at the bottom of the slide. And then as a comparison, this is the proposed scheme. You'll see that the setback has been increased in this currently proposed scheme, and along with a stepped profile on the southern elevation to Abingdon Court. As a result of this change in massing, the scheme would now comply with BRE guidelines on sunlight and daylight and would ensure that there would be no harmful increase in the sense of enclosure to nearby residents. It is therefore considered that the previous reason for refusal relating to light and enclosure has been addressed, but this is important to note that this is a new scheme, and in coming to a decision, members need to undertake the balancing exercise, which is laid out in the summary section 1 of the report. I do not intend to repeat that in detail now, but in brief, consideration needs to be given to the test set out within the National Planning Policy Framework, the NPPF, in balancing harm to designated heritage assets with public benefits. Less than substantial harm resulting from the proposals has been identified to the character and appearance of the Edward Square, Scarsdale and Abingdon Conservation Area, and the significance of the neighbouring Grade 2 listed church through the impact upon its setting. But this less than substantial harm needs to be weighed up against the public benefits of the proposal, the reuse of this long-term vacant site, the purpose-built care home for the borough, the expansion of a social and community facility, new homes, and contributions to the local economy include some of these public benefits. And officers have taken the view that these public benefits outweigh the less than substantial harm identified to heritage assets. In addition, an overall planning balancing exercise is necessary. The building would safeguard the living conditions of neighbouring properties in terms of light conditions, outlook, privacy and noise, and will fulfil the requirements of other planning policies relating to sustainability and transport as set out within the officer's report. There is some conflict that has been identified with aspects of design policies and policies resisting the loss of the Tree of Heaven, but as a whole, the proposal accords with the overall development plan, which would mean that the starting point is that permission should be granted. If members conclude that this is not the case, there are also other material considerations which need to be taken into account, weighing in favour of granting. These include the continuation and expansion of the care home, the social and community use, and additional homes for the borough's housing stock. For this reason, the application is recommended for approval. This is subject to a legal agreement which includes contributions in line with the planning obligations and are set out within section 7 of the report. And finally, I would draw your attention to the addendum report, copies of which you have received, and in particular to the additional letters. One additional correction to the report to add to those is that in paragraph 6.65, the urban greening factor score should be 0.42 rather than the stated 0.44. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Now, we've got speakers this evening, and a number of people have registered to speak in objection to the proposal. Now, I don't know who would like to lead off to introduce or to start. Between all of you, you've got up to 6 minutes, and also in addition, I've allowed my colleagues, Councillor Addenbrooke and Councillor Siren, to be present, and they can ask questions. We can ask them questions if we wish. So who would like to start? Barry, would you like to go first?
Chairman, thank you.
Yeah.
I'm Barry Mundy. I'm chairman of the ESSA Conservation Area Society. We have 3 of us speaking tonight. We have myself, Mary Forsyth from Abingdon Court, and Sally Thomas from the United Reformed Church next door. So I'm going to kick off, and the other 2 will follow. Local Plan Policy CL2 says the Council will require all developments to be of the highest architectural and urban design quality. Contrast this with the Design and Conservation Area Officer's report. Overly dominant, unsightly, unbalanced, convoluted, uncharacteristic, disjointed. Rarely have I read a more damning officer report. And yet the report to this committee suggests that there is a public benefit which overrides conservation and design. This benefit amounts to 5 additional rooms from the existing, counting as 4 net additional homes. 8 rooms for dementia sufferers will be at basement level, with very poor levels of daylight and sunlight. Only this week an appeal was refused for an application with similar characteristics within this borough. The inspector decided that less than substantial harm to a conservation area and a listed building is still harm and should not be overridden in favour of a supposed public good. Moreover, in this time of climate change consciousness, it's absolutely extraordinary that the proposed building needs carbon-hungry air conditioning to maintain safe comfort conditions, even in the bedrooms. It has so much accommodation below ground it will require a permanently operating plant to keep it safe. It's nowhere near achieving on-site net zero carbon. No wonder there are acoustic problems with the plant achieving RBKC standards, which somehow or other have been let to slip. We agree the site must be brought back to life and that care homes are urgently needed. We just don't agree that this one will be good for the conservation area, the local community, the environment, or the people who will end their days there. We urge the committee to refuse this application.
Thank you, Barry. Mary Forsyth, Chair of Abingdon Court. Categorically, consistently, Abingdon Court has stated we support a care home, but we passionately object to a developer for profit alone trying to squeeze in a mini hotel. Detailed plans not required for a major application, cavalier breaking of local plan policies, potential technical errors in the acoustic report, the decision by the EHO to alter standards, risking serious amenity loss. No amount of conditions can rectify all the above, all appalling. The local plan policies and SPDs on noise and double basement must and cannot be derogated. Your own conservation design officer is scathing. Your arboriculturists opposed. This is an important site in a Royal Borough's conservation area. But what does the council do? It rolls over. It accepts every incursion instead of making the developer redesign. Avon House design, despite its facade, took into account residents' needs, focused on a courtyard and gardens with mature trees. Its demise due to the poor care and management, not size or communal facilities. It cries out to be refurbished, but for 5 bedrooms more, the developer plans an enormous excavation, flouting zero carbon targets and with its vast multi-layered construction breaching policy to profiteer and to cater for the ultra-rich. This is not for the local community, nor the borough's socially needy. This is purely for the pockets of wealthy investors. Dementia sufferers destined to 4 metres below ground, encased by a giant 6.1 metre retaining wall, does not bear thinking about. How can a council who espouses excellence in design consider this fitting? Uphold council policy, deny the wealthy investors their pot of gold, demand a care home espousing excellence in design for your electorate. Thank you.
Sally Thomas for United Reformed Church. There is a traditional saying which is for me an apt term for this planning application: fur coat and no knickers. When you look beneath the glossy marketing covering, there is a concerning absence of detail. This is not a NIMBY objection. We want a care home, except any development will involve some disruption and would look forward to a mutually beneficial relationship with both residents and staff. This council has a reputation for excellence and high standards, so why is this committee considering overriding the RBKC Conservation and Design Report, which clearly states how and why this proposed development would be harmful? It draws attention to the numerous conflicts with the local plan policies and makes particular reference to the detrimental impact on Kensington United Reformed Church. Is it worth such sacrifice for only 5 bedrooms, which amount to 4 units, a drop in the ocean for your annual target of 488? The proposed increased height not only diminishes the natural light into the church, but also results in lack of privacy both for residents and our building users, with windows overlooking one another. There are intentionally no rooms available for social services and also no accommodation for couples wishing to continue to share a room. Refurbishing the current building is a valid option that should be considered. Both KYN and Abingdon Court commissioned independent reports on light and noise levels. These conflict. Has the council taken steps to ascertain from professionals in these fields which are the more accurate? If not, should not this be done before a final decision is made? Placing vulnerable people living with dementia in a double basement with little access to natural light is unacceptable. Academic research stresses the benefits and importance of natural light for people living with dementia. Space for personal items, including items of furniture, is also important. I would urge you to defer a final decision until this whole committee has visited the site and listened to our valid concerns in situ. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. We will now hear from the applicant team, and then the committee will ask questions of both sides, in inverted commas. Now, Mr. Henderson, are you going to lead off to introduce the applicant team?
I think this will be led by the applicant themselves,
Okay,
Mr. David
please
Rowe.
go ahead when you're ready. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm David Rowe, the Land and Planning Director for KIN. I have worked in elderly accommodation, planning and development for over 22 years. For the last 14 of these, I have specialised in care homes in London and the South East. I'm delighted officers have recommended this application for approval. The team have worked tirelessly over the last year, including collaborating with local residents, to design a scheme that overcomes the previous reasons for refusal and addresses other concerns raised by the community. The scheme has numerous and significant benefits, which have also been noted in the officer's report. We are bringing back to life a tired, unattractive and defunct care home site and proposing to create a modern, best-in-class nursing and dementia care facility for 40 elderly and vulnerable local residents. There's currently a 500-bed shortfall in the borough alone. The proposed building is fully BRE compliant. This was the sole reason for the refusal to the previous scheme. The proposed building is smaller than the 2016 scheme. It also has a smaller basement. The scheme involves creating materially more outdoor green space for benefit to both our residents and visually to our neighbours. We're planting 59 new trees, many of which will be mature on day one. This results in a net gain of over 50 when some existing are lost. The design will significantly enhance the streetscape with a high-quality classical design. The scheme's sustainability credentials far exceed those set out in the London Plan. The engineering will reduce local flooding risk as surface water runoff is to be controlled on site. The noise assessment concluded that plant noise emissions are predicted to be less than existing background noise levels at all adjacent noise-sensitive premises. The proposed new home will create around 76 new and much-needed jobs in the borough, relieving pressure on the NHS and local public health services as well. The scheme will positively contribute towards the borough's housing policy, unlocking underoccupied, larger homes for families. The new building will enable the delivery of expert care in a purpose-designed and built environment that offers standards well in excess of CQC guidelines. In summary, we believe that our proposed redevelopment of this site represents a compelling opportunity to bring back a vital service to the community. This new state-of-the-art home would serve those elderly residents and their families at the most vulnerable time of their lives. I believe London residents should have a choice to remain in their community. The proposed care home would provide round-the-clock care for up to 40 residents, from nursing to end-of-life care. There will be distinct households catering for specialist dementia care in a safe and secure environment. Kin is not extra care, where residents usually buy or rent the accommodation. We work on a standard care home weekly fee basis for the accommodation and care given as one package, depending on the individual needs of the resident. COVID-19 has taught us more than ever about the need for quality accommodation, including full wet room provision and the need for higher standards in building design and the care provided. We know that every development may cause temporary disruption and disturbance. We are committed to mitigating this as much as physically possible. We're not just a developer seeking to build a scheme and turn a profit. We are a well-funded company which will not only see through the construction of the building, but will also operate the care home. We have a long-term commitment to this community and to the neighbours. We'll always take time to speak to the local residents and will continue to do so. We have listened to the concerns that people living close to a development such as this will naturally have. I would like to assure local residents that amongst many other factors, the main contractor must have signed up to the Consider It Constructor scheme. Although we know we've not been able to please everybody, we have been gratified by the amount of positive community support. We believe this is a high-quality design and an outstanding opportunity for the area. I'll be delighted to answer any questions you may have. Should there be any technical questions, I have various members of our professional team available. Thank you for your time. I do hope you can support the officer's recommendation and give your approval. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. So, colleagues, it's our opportunity to ask questions to either side. Who'd like to go first? Emma, you go first.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to start off with a question to Mrs. Forsyth. You spoke very passionately about you thought it was going to be a mini hotel and refurbishment would be better, and that they're profiteering and it's not for the local community. All those things are hugely important. They're not actually planning considerations, unfortunately. But the fact that the public benefits are being put up against the disbenefits of this are planning considerations. So would you say, do you think that there are, from what you have said, do you think that the public benefits outweigh the disadvantages of this building?
From the point of view of Abingdon Court, we are faced with a mini hotel. At the moment, the site of Avon House, I'm sure you have all gone and seen it, and it's quiet. It's not that big. What we're so worried about is the size of what they're trying to put into this very difficult triangular site. It's not big. As for the benefits, we absolutely support a care home. We've always been consistent about that. We support a care home. But for 5 more rooms, this is our great concern, there is going to be this enormous excavation. It's a double basement. As you know, we are opposed to the double basement. You have heard what we have said about the double basement. We sent out yesterday a note to all of you regarding this light well, which quite clearly is against CL7G. So to answer succinctly, we really do want the care home to be back, but we do not believe that what is proposed is actually going to be beneficial to the actual residents, let alone ourselves, you know, I'm talking about the care home residents, because you cannot put, we believe, 8 people suffering from dementia into what they euphemistically called lower ground, which is actually 4.4 meters down, and then it has this enormous 6.1 retaining wall. Now that's 8. So how can it possibly be beneficial to the community to put people into that sort of circumstances? We absolutely oppose that. And we feel very strongly that what is on offer is not actually going to be beneficial to the care home residents themselves.
Okay, thank you. Could I follow that up, please? Yes. Yeah, I take your point, absolutely. The other issue is, looking at the photographs, that part of Abingdon Court is obviously that it's facing in different directions, but there is one entire wing that overlooks Avon House, that overlooks that site. Yes. With main windows. I don't know if they're bedroom windows or sitting room windows or what are they, but would that have, from the point of view, excuse me, of that particular wing of Abingdon Court, do you think it would have a serious effect on the people who use those rooms overlooking it?
Absolutely. There's a whole terrace, which is a garden terrace. It's demised to the property, and it's, how can I identify? It's right in the middle, overlooking what we call the courtyard and the magnificent Tree of Heaven. May I just comment, the photos of the Tree of Heaven that were shown were very poor. I believe that, councillors, you have the photos that we have sent in to you, and you can see the magnificence of the Tree of Heaven. Now, this apartment, for example, is actually looking straight at that. Then we have a lot of our apartments have reversed their living accommodation to that way because the light is better. The light is so much better for them. So there are several apartments, whereas originally the main rooms were on the other side and then the bedrooms at the back. They have juxtaposed it. So you have living rooms looking out onto this as well.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I do know the building quite well. I actually had people I was responsible for who were housed in Avon House when it was working and who indeed had dementia. And one little pokey rooms, and it looks similar. I don't know if there's going to be much change for the accommodation, as you have said. So your concerns are for the future inhabitants of the proposed private, public, whatever it is, care home, but also for your residents in Abingdon Court. Is that correct?
That is absolutely. That sums it up completely. We absolutely have concern about those that are going into this monster of a building, but we also, of course, are deeply concerned that the noise that we are going to suffer from the plant, regardless of what the EHO says, if you take a quiet area, which is quiet at the moment, we've lived alongside it for 5 decades, 5 whole decades. We've never had any problem, other than, of course, the sounds of dear souls, being unhappy. But from the point of view of noise, no. You put all this plant into this quiet area, of course it's common sense you are going to hear it. You've got air handling units, you've got heat pumps, you've got boilers, you've got louvers, air conditioning units. It's impossible for it not to make an enormous difference to our residents.
Thank you. Could I ask Mr. Mundy, do you mind? I can... One for Mr. Munday?
Yes, just one question for Mr. Munday, and then
Okay.
we'll give others a chance.
Okay, no, I wanted to ask Mr. Munday, because I'm sure you're expert in these issues, about the specific design of the building and what you think about how it would fit into the rest of the street there, and whether or not it would be a vast improvement. I'm just curious about your view on that.
My objection really is that all the emphasis is on the street frontage, and okay, there's an acceptable classical style design, but what goes on behind that bears no relationship to what happens in the front. And I think, you know, the fur coat, no knickers description is quite apt, actually. When the first scheme was approved, it was designed in a consistently classical style by John Simpson, and my association didn't object. In fact, we supported that application. And since then, it's been downhill all the way. You know, admittedly, the architects have struggled to fit the amount of accommodation into the site, and it's a difficult problem. But there doesn't seem to be any consistency to the design between the front and what goes on at the back.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Tom, do you want to go? And then Sonia.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, a couple of questions for the applicants. So first off, on the second basement, you've heard the concerns from the objectors about the quality of accommodation that would be provided, particularly around lack of sunlight and, for example, dementia sufferers staying there. Why do you think that space would be an appropriate accommodation, high quality accommodation for them?
Excuse me, just to confirm, the second basement underneath the existing basement is for back of house facilities that are required to service the care home and offer the residents the standards that are needed for this type of...
So the lower basement, the bottom floor, would not provide any accommodation for residents?
Correct.
So residents would be just in the first basement, so to speak, is that correct?
That's correct, yeah.
Well, could you speak to light levels in the first basement and what you've done to ensure that is an appropriate accommodation space?
Absolutely. So I'll hand over to our architect, Melissa, who's probably best placed to answer that. But I'd just point out that this is a home in its entirety. So residents, as a good care home operator and a good provider of care, you wouldn't confine residents to one sole room in a whole development. What we've got on offer here is a whole home with a wealth of communal facilities and external areas, but Mel can go into some detail on the actual light levels.
Thank you, David, and thank you for your query. It's worth noting that within the care facility, the majority of a resident's time is not spent in their bedroom. The majority of the resident's time is spent within the community of the home itself and creating that community. The lower ground rooms were actually preferred rooms from residents. I'm an architect that's worked in the care sector for 18 years, solely specialising in care facilities across the UK. And the reason they become a preference and a choice is because there's outside private space for engagement. So the work that's been done with our landscape architect is to ensure that that outside courtyard space is usable space for planting, for gardening activity, for socialising with a resident's family member or friend. So the space is there that's actually usable, it's accessible from the room and enables natural ventilation to come into those rooms. In terms of light and outlook, the outlook from those rooms will give a view out to natural daylight, and it will also give a view for enhanced landscaping that's proposed to the retaining structure and the proposed 2 silver birch trees proposed at the upper level.
So, just to clarify, if we take the room with the least amount of daylight going into it on that floor, will it still have a view out? It won't, when we say daylight, it won't just be light channeled down, they will still have a view out onto the sort of terrace or, you know, a proper vista.
Every room has a view out. No room has a view of just a blank wall. Every room, even though our lower ground area has a retaining structure which is 3.5 metres away from the closest external face in that lower courtyard. It gives adequate provision and adequate space for somebody to sit outside on a chair with a table with a relative, and also raise planters around the periphery to encourage activity and garden activity.
Thank you very much. My next question is around noise. So we had objectors raise concerns about noise level, particularly with the amount of plant equipment required, and how in the report it says that RBKC's usual noise requirements, which I think are 10 decibels below background noise, could not be met. Could you tell us why those could be met, and why, despite that, you believe it won't cause a nuisance to neighbours? Thank you.
Again, if I pass that on to Daniel to my left here, our noise consultant, he'll be best placed to answer that for you.
Hello, Daniel Stringer, Sandy Brown, we're acoustic consultant throughout the project. So the history is we've done a detailed noise assessment of the site. We've measured existing background noise levels, and because of several reasons, there's quite a significant amount of plant on the site, which is not out of context with a normal commercial site in the area. We've got fairly low background noise levels for London, not compared to rural areas, but it's quite low noise levels for London. And one of the other reasons is because we've had to use air source heat pumps rather than boilers in some instances. There's a new requirement there to get the, I think it's the 35% London plan requirement, and it's very, very difficult to attenuate those particular units. We have done everything we can to attenuate the units. I mean, from a long history of the design, we initially had all the plant on the roof. We've effectively taken everything inside. All the air handling units have been moved to basement level, so we can provide additional attenuation and different duct attenuations. All the condensers and the air source heat pumps have also been brought into internal plant rooms on the 3rd floor level, and put acoustic louvers, which are the contentious items we've just heard about. There is a limitation fundamentally to how much attenuation you can put on this plant, because there needs to be a minimum airflow resistance that you just can't overcome if you provide too much attenuation to it. So we've really looked at every possible avenue for attenuation, and we've also selected the quietest possible plant in the area. The second question in relation to not achieving the 10 dB below background, I would say that that initial 10 dB actually comes from a now superseded British standard BS4 and 4.2. The current standard, which came out about 8 years ago, now asks for noise levels to be level with background level. And this is a point acknowledged by the EHO officer. We are still achieving a level in the daytime of 5 dB, and worst case, with all plant running at the absolute maximum conditions, 3 dB at night time. It is our view that that will not be audible virtually any of the time. I have to say, in the very quietest 5-10 minutes of a particular evening or of a daytime, you might just be able to hear it, but generally it's certainly not going to cause any disturbance, and it's not going to make a significant impact to the residents.
Thank you. Can I, Chair? Yeah, one more question. Thanks. Thank you. To the objectors, and sort of broadly to any of the objectors who'd like to reply. Having heard a response from the gentleman there on noise, and also I believe in the papers, I don't know if it's specifically a planning condition, but nonetheless our environmental health policy is that if the equipment is audible, then it can be or will be and is reported, the environmental health officers will ask that it's switched off if it's audible inside someone's apartment. Does that give you any reassurance on noise? And if not, why not? Thank you.
No, it doesn't give us reassurance, and indeed we have demonstrated by sending in reports, and I'm going to ask John Sim, who is sitting beside me here, to answer that. John.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of things like audibility is a very difficult thing to identify because we all have different levels of hearing. But if you have a noise source that has any tonal component, intermittency, something like that, you can hear that significantly lower than the other background noise levels in the area. Our hearing is not very good at hearing level. It takes a 3 to 5 dB change before you can state, yes, I think there's been a change in level. But we can hear, particularly tonal noise, 25 dB and more lower than existing noise in an area. Therefore, to state that it would be inaudible, I think is not actually a possibility that you can say that, particularly when you're looking at noise being controlled only 3 dB below background noise levels. And those background noise levels were established from, to be perfectly honest, a rather poor noise survey of the area. There was one long-term survey position on the Abingdon Court side of the building. On the other side of the buildings, the total amount of measurement that has been reported I've seen is 35 minutes during a daytime period. No nighttime measurements on the church side or on the Adam and Eve side. And the noise environment of those two facades are likely to be different to those from the Abingdon Court. The gap between Abingdon Court and Avon House is relatively large. Therefore, noise from the main noise source on the passing traffic can get down there relatively easily. Between the church and Avon House is a much narrower gap. Therefore, noise is much more difficult to get down there. And then obviously behind the building, that area is completely screened from the road traffic by Avon House itself. Therefore, I don't believe a noise survey that's been carried out has properly identified the noise environment for all of the residential properties around the site. And therefore, I don't see how you can base the criteria on what appears to be one long-term noise survey on the Abingdon Court side of the building. And therefore, any standard or any criterion that derives from those, I don't think can be relied upon in terms of setting a standard. So essentially, as I say, I don't believe that it can be stated that the noise will be inaudible. And on top of that, does that inaudibility require residents to keep their windows closed? In which case, how can you impose a condition which essentially imposes on residents they have to keep the windows closed to have an acceptable level of acoustic comfort? So I think these are questions that may be able to be answered, but may require additional reports or surveys to be carried out.
Okay, thank you very much. I think there's you raised some interesting points which
could I
you might want to.
It's on the same point. I hear what's being said by the applicant, but I haven't heard the evidence for this. There's no detail there at the moment. I mean, there might be, but we haven't heard it. But going back to what I said, both KYN and Abingdon Court commissioned independent reports on light and noise levels. They conflict. I feel that this wants properly researching. We're having two views here, and that does concern me very much.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Chair, may I speak on that?
Well, just briefly,
Very briefly.
in reply to Councillor Bennett's question.
Councillor Bennett, yes, we have the Sandy Brown reports in front of us, and I would just like to point out, it says it's acknowledged that the precise mitigation, for example, has not been detailed. It also it says it is not feasible to fully comply with RBKC requirements at all locations. Why not? We also read that this is an overstate and it should be appreciated. RBKC have already been consulted and have indicated that our approach is reasonable in context, which we find deeply depressing. Thank you.
Chairman, could I just add one more point on that? Sorry.
I think we probably need to move on to other questions. Okay, very, very quickly, very briefly.
Well,
I need to bring our colleagues in.
Just the point about adding a condition about noise. It seems to me that the council is very unlikely to demand the operator to switch off the plant on noise grounds for a home full of vulnerable people. So I don't think the condition is worth the paper it's written on, to be honest.
No, I mean, that's, yeah, I hear what you say. Sonia, I think you wanted to ask some questions. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Question for the applicants. Residents experienced flash flooding last summer. There was considerable damage faced by people in Abingdon Court in particular. Will the addition of the sub-basement aggravate the problem of recent flooding, and what measures have you or will you take to mitigate the risk and mitigate any risk of flood damage being caused to neighbouring buildings? I have another sort of follow-on question related to the double basement, but I'm happy to ask that after.
Just very briefly, this is a wholesale redevelopment of the site, being consulted with our structural civil engineers to take into account the land makeup in the area. The scheme, as I already said, has a improved surface water retention on site, so we don't envisage any negative impacts on flooding, more so a very positive impact on neighbouring properties.
Would you be able to explain how it would have a positive impact on neighbouring properties?
I'll hand it over to the expert who can provide a bit more detail, but yes.
Hello, I'm Jeev Shikar. I'm from HTS, we're structural engineers. I think it's simply that as we've got a blue roof and we've got an attenuation tank, we are simply holding our rainwater on site for a longer period of time, releasing it slowly into the sewer, and therefore that simple act is reducing the risk of flash flooding.
Okay, I have another question just on living conditions. What can you tell us about the living conditions for those who will live in the care home? I know you've covered daylight in the basement with Councillor Bennett and confirmed that no bedrooms will be located on the sub-basement. How about the size of the rooms? Are these rooms, how do they compare to standard room sizes in care homes? Is there a possibility of couples staying together, as was mentioned by the objectors? Are they large enough, and do you think that it meets adequate standards?
Yes, to all of those. I mean, the design of the building is so much so that this will be nearly double the size of CQC standards. In my opinion, those standards are out of date. So what we're proposing is accommodation well in excess of any guidelines. The idea is to future-proof this for any changes that should be made probably to care home standards in the future. It's important to note that about 50% of this building is either communal or back of house. So the other 50% is a residence accommodation. So along with their own increased personal and private space, they have exceptional standards of varied communal areas, lounges, diners, activity rooms, hair salons, in addition to external amenity space as well. So across the board, this is a massive improvement, not only on what's there, but on future standards.
Thank you. And one final question for the applicants. I'm a councillor for Chelsea Riverside, where there's lots of local appetite for care homes. I note that a number of people have welcomed the possibility of an extra provision of care homes in the area. Just wondering what analysis you've done of the need for care homes in the borough and of these types of private care homes in particular. And I mean, I haven't read anything about the sort of cost of living in one of these care homes, but are you confident that you're genuinely providing a service, a needed service to the local community?
Absolutely. I mean, across London, care homes have suffered more than anywhere else in the country, mainly because of competition from residential developers and the high-density environments that are located there. We've done a lot of research onto need, demand, etc. And as I've said before, there's around 500. There's a 500 shortfall of bed spaces at the moment in the borough. That's only going to get worse with an ageing population and with very few care home applications coming forward.
Thank you. And just one question to the objectors. Particularly interested to know your views on the impact of the building on the church in particular. Is there enough space between the church and the proposed care home? Do you agree that the design respects the dominance of the church, and are there any other things you'd like to speak to just on the impact on the church? Thank you.
There will be a considerable impact on the church. I'll go back to say we want a care home. We welcome a care home. We want to have a relationship with a care home. Our concern is that these particular plans are not suitable for the community. You know, as has been said, the facade is fine. It's what's behind it that's so concerning. There will be a lack of privacy both for people in the church and for residents. There's a very narrow gap between the church and the proposed building. There's enough for a fire exit, but there's, you know, for both buildings, but very little else. So people will be looking in on one another, and that's a lack of privacy on both sides, if that concerns us. The noise level could be very disturbing. It could put people off using our building, and we are very, very well used by a number of community groups. We provide a good service for all sorts of people, and we just don't know. I'm not hearing clear evidence about these noise levels, and that worries me. I would like to see, I mean, I'm no scientist, but I would like to have something that I can read that would put my mind at rest, and I haven't seen that. It comes back to what I was saying. Where's the detail? The gloss in both the brochures, on the website, on the Facebook page, looks good, but there's nothing else. There's no detail, and so the potential for the impact, a detrimental impact on the church, is there, and that concerns us. But to have, and we know there'll be disruption whatever happens there, that's okay, but we want it to be right for the potential residents, and we don't see that at the moment. You know, our priority is always people, and that is where our whole concern rests, really, that the people who are intended to live here will not have the quality of life that they need and deserve.
Thank you. I've got a couple of final questions. First of all, I'd like to ask Councillors Addenbrooke and Siren, who are joining us, I'd just like to ask them how you would respond to the following train of thought. Avon House, it was a care home, but it's been closed for a long time. We know that some people who actually live quite nearby have said they think it's an eyesore of a building. Actually, they you know, it doesn't. I think within the conservation appraisal document, it's actually classed as being neutral, but I think quite a few people have expressed the opinion it's an eyesore. I'm just interested to know what you feel about the principle of it being brought back into use, and if there are any particular points that you would like to make in relation, obviously, to the detail of the application. I don't know how you'd like to do this, but...
Thank you, Chair. I think we're all agreed we want something done to this building. We all want a care home back. But it would have a benefit to the community, but only a certain part of that community. The original Avon House, the local authority had people living there, and we were funding them. We would not be able to fund people in this type of care home. We have a number of very high-end care homes in the borough, but what we lack is actually affordable care homes, or a mixture. I mean, Ellesmere House, we have funding, and there's people paying privately in particular, the same with the Bupa, and the same up in North Kensington. So I think it's really important that, yes, we do want something, but it's got to be something that's suitable for people living there as well. And prior to COVID, I visited just about every care home in the borough. And the thing that struck me was that the care homes that were really sustainable through COVID were the ones that had green spaces, gardens outside, people could go and sit outside. Sitting in a room with nothing, looking out at a blank wall or maybe one little bit of greenery was not good enough. Really not good enough for those very vulnerable people. And I think it just worries me, this lower ground floor. At Ellesmere House, they do have a lower ground floor, but they have a big, big garden that goes all the way around. And so people, and they do have a dementia centre down there, and people can spend a lot of time in the garden. But just with this design, I feel that there's not enough space in the lower ground floor. I also have concerns about staffing. If you're putting the staff into the double basement, you know, we all know it's very difficult to get staff in the care sector. That's not really a good working environment for anybody, so I do have concerns about that. But I'll hand over to Anne now.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, Chair, for your question. So I think local people really do want to see that building back in use, renewed, rebuilt. It is a bit of an eyesore, I would agree with you. And we absolutely support a care home going back there, whether it's a refurb. I think that's an interesting question that hasn't really been adequately explored. But I think we really have sympathy with some of our residents who've objected about this application, particularly around the noise from the plant. And we're not convinced by the argument that's been made. There are conflicting reports. I completely agree with Barry that nobody's going to turn that plant off if it's noisy because of the people that are living there. So I think that is an area that really has to be explored and agreed on, because at the moment there isn't agreement. I think we have concerns about the bulk, and there has been some work which we absolutely welcome on the size of the building and particularly the impact that it's had on some of the immediate neighbours. And also Essa's points about the design. And yes, we're working off a pretty low base with what's currently there. But, you know, we really do have sympathy with the fact that previously the application that was approved was a better designed and was more liked by local people. So, yes, of course we want the building to be renewed, but I think we really have to make sure that those elements of it are talked through and agreed with, and that's what we'd ask the committee to do tonight.
Okay, thank you. I've got a couple of quick questions to the applicants. First of all, can I ask about the flank wall that faces onto Abingdon Court in your proposal? Can you just talk me through exactly what the materials proposed for that are? I know previously there was discussion about whether it was brick or rendered and that kind of thing. Can you just make some comments about that?
Absolutely, Chair, no problem at all. So the proposed material finish to the entirety of the building is stucco render, of which the acoustic louvers are proposed to be colour rail matched to ensure there's continuity and no discrepancy between the two.
And can I ask about trees? Now, the tree of heaven, well, in order to obviously build a basement, your proposal would require the removal of that. Can you just talk me through, I think, did you mention birch trees that it was proposed to be put in on that? And obviously those trees would face Abingdon Court. Is that correct? And what kind of size of trees are you proposing that would be put there?
So the tree of heaven is actually an invasive species. So when we look at it, it's actually in some circumstances classed as a noxious weed. And in this site in particular, the root ball of the tree itself has actually outgrown its skin. So it's actually starting to undermine the stability of the boundary wall between Abingdon Court and our site itself. What's proposed here in replacement are two semi-mature silver birch trees, of which after year one will end up with a canopy of 8 metres in width and a height of overall 10 metres. The existing tree of heaven has a stem of 6 metres before the canopy actually starts. So the first and second floors of Abingdon Court have very little screening from the lower part of the tree of heaven. It then obviously is taller than what we are proposing at day one. But by the end of year 10, so 10 years on, we actually look at an overall height of that tree becoming 17 metres high and a breadth of tree of 12 metres.
Okay, so the answer to my question is you're proposing to plant trees that initially would be of the order of 10 metres or so tall, yeah?
Yes, Chair.
And that there would be 2 trees.
There would be 2 trees instead of the one that's currently there at present. It's also worth noting, if I can, just for 2 seconds, that the outside amenity space on the 3rd floor that faces Abingdon Court that was referenced earlier is non-accessible. This is not an accessible garden space for our residents. It is visual amenity from the lounge area itself.
Actually, just very briefly, that's something I also meant to clarify. So at the higher levels, there are various outside spaces that are planted, but they're not actually accessible. Is that correct?
Absolutely, Chair. So this scheme comes forward with 20% additional outside amenity space to that was refused in 2020. Of that, the majority is non-accessible, with the exception of the lower ground area and the orchard terrace to the rear of the 3rd floor.
Okay. And a final question, which is on a different train of thought. If this proposal was to be accepted, granted, I think actually the way in which it was built out would be very important, because obviously the church and Abingdon Court and also at the rear, Adam and Eve Mews are very nearby. What sort of proposals would you have in terms of, I suppose it's a construction method statement, in terms of acoustic barriers or baffling, that kind of thing? Would that be something that would be feasible and might be incorporated as a condition were we minded to go in that direction? Would someone like to comment on that? I don't know, can someone speak to that?
It may be best for the council to comment on that. I mean, RBKC have got a very stringent construction policy. It's a lot more strict than a majority of other councils in the country, restricting vehicle movements, types of vehicles, working hours, delivery hours, etc. Not only to the normal working hours of the site, but also outside of school hours, etc., and certain requirements. So it may be something aimed more at the council, but yes, full construction management programme would be submitted, and we've taken into account that during our build programme and costs.
Okay, so just to make sure I got that right, obviously construction traffic management plan would be something that would be certain to be a condition for a site of this size. But I'm really thinking of something slightly different, which is it's the noise and dust impact on immediate neighbours for the kind of key points of construction, which I guess are the demolition of what looks to me like a concrete building, and then of course I guess the structural formation of the lower levels of a new building. Can you add anything about that?
Yeah, I believe that's also covered in the policies, but again, because we've taken into account that, we'd be happy to accept that as part of a condition.
Okay, thank you very much indeed for that. Emma and then Tom.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to ask Ms McGee, please. There's a very beautiful visual of the front facade from Allen Street. And I found it quite confusing. I had to keep on looking at the plans to see how that worked, because it looks like a grand Georgian mansion, but it looks quite close to the street. How much closer is it to the street than the existing building? And where is this drive-through? I couldn't work out where it was, because it looks like solid railings, and yet there seems to be a drive-through. So can you just talk me through that visual, because it doesn't show how that works.
Yes, absolutely. So the proposed building is in the exact same location as the existing building, so it's no further forward, so it retains exactly the same position in the street frontage. In terms of the boundary to the front, there's a proposed railing that runs along the front of the front boundary to Allen Street, to which there is gated access in and out for vehicle movement. Okay, so there is one, it's just the visual is slightly confusing.
All right, thank you. That's all I needed to know.
Just going back to shared outside space, could you let me know what, if you have the measurements, how much shared outside space is, and also remind me how many residents will be in the home?
Sure, there's 40 residents we're proposing in the home, and I think Mel's got the stats on the space.
So in total of outside amenity space, including the non-accessible, there's 155 square metres of outside space. In terms of accessible, I don't have the exact square meterage with me for the lower ground and the upper terrace.
But, so accessible, you don't have the figure?
Not with me today.
Okay, well, it then makes it hard to answer my second question, but my second question was around how many other homes KYN operate and how the amount of outside space for this number of residents compares to those other homes.
At present, Kin have got one care home under construction that's due to open this year in Bickley, Bromley. We've got another one that is under construction due to open next year in Fulham, near Hurlingham. And then we've got a number in planning, so this would be, if successful, the possibly third, fourth or fifth scheme that we would operate. Comparisons to other garden areas, it varies depending on the location. You know, this is an urban site. It has a considerable amount of garden space. To the Bromley one, there is a larger site in a more suburban environment. But compared to the London ones, this has got a very high level because we've been able to take into account or factor into account the various accessible roof terraces.
So you believe compared to London, typical London care homes, this has an above average amount of outside space?
Yeah, this is in London, this is good.
Okay, thank you.
Sonia, do you want to ask a final question?
Yes, just on how the left side of the building, is that closer to the church than the current building on the site?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed. Now, colleagues, would you like to have a short break, or you happy to go on? No? Okay.
Chairman?
Yep.
Before we move on, can I just check something on behalf of the officers? Because it was a while ago now, but Mrs. Forsyth just mentioned some documents and photographs that have been circulated to the members, and we're not sure that we've seen them. So we were just wondering, you know, were they circulated quite recently? Or are they sort of old documents that everybody's seen? We just wanted to check whether we've seen them, whether the applicant has seen them as well.
There have been a lot of documentation has been circulated about this application because obviously it's been under consideration for a while. I'm not aware of anything that I've been sent just immediately, you know, in the recent past. The last document I think I had was something that the applicant's agents circulated a few days ago, and I think that was sent by email to all members of the committee, I think. I don't know, does anyone, do you have a different, Tom, do you have a different understanding, or?
Okay, that's fine. We just wanted to make sure that everybody had seen everything and photographs hadn't been sent to members without also being sent to the officers and the applicant as well. So just wanted to check that.
No, I think I'd be content about that in the context of this type of application. I think we've seen everything.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, well, in that case, thank you very much, everyone, for answering our questions. That's very helpful. We now move on to the next stage of the meeting, which is where members of the committee can ask officers questions. Who would like to go first about that? Sonia?
Thank you. My understanding is that planning permission was granted in 2016 to provide a 24-bedroom neurological rehabilitation centre, which is obviously no longer part of the proposal. So my question is, on what basis would a double basement be justified now? Thank you.
The basement comprises a lower ground basement and then obviously the sub-basement below that. The existing building does have an existing basement, and so the lower ground basement would be an extension of the existing basement. And the additional level would be one additional level below that. So that is in accordance with policy, because we are not introducing 2 new levels of basement. There is already one there at the moment.
To clarify, the change of the purpose of the site from a neurological rehabilitation centre into a care home isn't taken into account. That's not a factor to consider at all.
No, that's it. It isn't a reason that this is considered acceptable.
Thank you.
A couple of questions, but just firstly to follow up on the double basement. So am I right in saying that the extant planning permission granted in 2016, which has been triggered, there was no condition within that the lower basement could only ever be used for a neurological facility? Obviously, the permission in this case was for a neurological facility, but there was no condition specifying that there could never be a change of use. Is that correct?
Not a specific condition, no.
So if as the permission is extant, would I be right in saying they could, the applicant could go ahead and build it, and then would they even, under sort of Class E or such like, even necessarily need to apply for a change of use? They could just use it for something different.
It depends obviously on what that change of what that use would be.
But there are some changes of use they could do without planning permission. Is that correct?
Yes, there would be. Yes.
Yeah. So no, I just wanted to clarify that there was no specific condition on that requiring it to only ever be used as a neurological facility. Second, if I may, Chair, second question. We've had quite a robust discussion, lively discussion around the sound, the noise surveys, and we've heard objectors raise a few concerns around that it conflicts with other reports, that it was taken in a particular location and rather than in multiple relevant locations, and also on the time of day. So I suppose 2 questions on that. Firstly, do you have any concerns regarding on those objections? And secondly, if we were to grant, would there be additional conditions that we could put on it that address those concerns?
Our environmental health officer has seen both of the reports which were referred to by the objectors. He is satisfied that the submitted report by the applicant is adequate to show that the noise and equipment would not cause a noise nuisance to neighbouring properties. So I'm satisfied, based on his advice, that the condition that we are recommending would be sufficient to ensure that their living conditions are maintained. In terms of additional conditions, there is, obviously we have the condition recommended, which does control the noise levels. there would be, I think, the difficulty of trying to amend that or change that would be that the applicant has already looked very carefully at ways of ensuring that our standard noise condition is whether that could be met, and has felt with the limitations of the site and what equipment is required that that is not possible. So the difficulty of trying to amend the wording of that condition is that in practice it is unlikely to be complied with. I'm satisfied after discussion with our environmental health officer that the condition that we've recommended is the best one that would be practical for the applicant and would still be sufficient to safeguard the residents.
That's condition 20 you're referring to. Noise from building services, plant and vents. I think it must be.
Yes, we do also have condition 25, which says that the measures outlined within the submitted acoustic report should be implemented in full and maintained. So that refers to the acoustic measures, which is a further safeguard.
Well, I do note in condition 20 that it refers specifically, which one of the objectors brought up, to tonal noises, which is good to see, and that there's an additional requirement for tonal noises of not exceeding a level of 15 decibels as opposed to 3 below. But so you don't think there would be any opportunity for an additional condition requiring a further noise test which took into account more locations, because I can see the objector's point that just from one location might not give a full picture, and sort of more locations and more times a day. I don't want to design the whole test here at committee, but a sort of further, more robust test, given how tight the site is.
Yes, it would be possible to do that. You could, a condition could require the submission of a further noise report if members felt that that was necessary.
Thank you, Chair. I've got two main questions, well, two under environment and then another one. I'm just rather surprised that we've just completely forgotten the climate emergency and all our fine aspirations for new buildings. This is going to be an expensive building. There seems to be absolutely zero consideration of any kind of natural ventilation, even when it might be possible. Obviously, some times of year it isn't, but all sealed windows and all the rest of it causing potential problems and driving neighbours mad with low hums and all the rest of it. I'm very surprised we haven't pulled them up on that, actually. And the other one, which is part of the same issue, was the response we just heard to Councillor Sonia's comment about question about flooding, which is that their response was about attenuating flooding of their building and nothing to do with actually preserving neighbouring buildings from flooding that their double basement might cause. So that is one, I'm just a bit concerned about those two issues, and then I have another question in a minute.
Yes, the building has been designed to exceed current energy standards as set out within the London plan and as detailed within the report. The energy statement that's been submitted by the applicants does explain that there have been passive design measures proposed, including, for example, an efficient building fabric, and efficient lighting and so on. Obviously, with the precise nature of the care home and the type of residents that will be occupying the building, there are quite high requirements for cooling. Some of those residents will be needing high medical nursing care. So there is a reasonable expectation that it should be possible to use cooling methods because of that. They are doing what they can, as I say, to reduce energy demand. For example, they're also proposing to have heat recovery on the cooling by means of a thermal wheel, so that they use the heat from the air conditioning to feed into the system. So we are satisfied that the energy statement that has been submitted does, as I say, exceed the required targets.
Okay, and the flooding issue?
Flooding, in terms of the, we've heard that the SUDS measures on the site, such as the blue roofs, would decrease the runoff, which would be beneficial not only to this site but also to neighbouring sites. So those blue roofs would hold the water in effect and stop it entering the drainage system, which would, as I say, not be beneficial just to Avon House but also to the neighbouring properties.
Okay, but the double basement may actually make it worse, but, you know, anyway. Okay, no, thank you. My other question was, I heard from several of the objectors similar comments about, you know, profiteering, not for the local community, people are our priority and so on. So this whole issue, this is social and community use. What is public benefit in this context? Because this is a business, and as we heard, the objectors thought it isn't actually for them, it's not for local residents, it will be for other people maybe coming in with more money. I don't know, this is what the suggestion was. So how can we define public benefit if local people don't think it is for their benefit?
Obviously, public benefit is a wide-ranging, covers a wide range of things. I note that some of the letters of support do welcome the provision of a care home for local residents. Although it is, as you say, a private care home, that does not mean that it doesn't fulfil a need for elderly residents. Okay. Obviously, the issue of paying and the funding of such accommodation is a much wider issue than...
Absolutely. I mean, we heard from Councillor Addenbrooke her concern that you know, it wouldn't serve the local community, and Avon House before certainly had you know, publicly funded residents there. And as I said, I visited it. And yeah, it's just this idea that all the issues that there are with this building are being set aside for public benefit, and that none of the objectors can see a public benefit. That's my problem with this.
Well, yes, and the public benefits are the provision. At the moment, the site is, as we all know, the site is vacant. It has been vacant for a number of years, since 2014. It's not currently fulfilling any need by being vacant. By reintroducing the care home and expanded care home, which would fulfil and identify need within the borough, it would provide accommodation for residents along with additional homes, are the public benefits that we have identified.
Okay, I'll just ask a quick question, actually. This is in relation to proposed condition 9 about demolition management plan. I want to come back to the point I raised earlier, because one of my concerns is about managing what would, were this to be granted, inevitably be heavy construction work. Now, demolition clearly is not the kind of thing, it would never take place on a Saturday evening or something like that. But within condition 9, would it be possible to amend that, or in having the discharge of the condition, have amendments that meant that some kind of attenuation for the particularly noisy and also periods in construction when there would be bound to be a lot of dust as well as noise. Is that something that's feasible within that condition, the way that it's drafted at the moment? The discharge of that condition, were it to get to that stage, is that something we could do?
Yes, I mean, the condition does include a timetable of dust generating activities. So that is already included within that condition.
Okay, thank you. Tom, last ones.
Sorry, Chair, I've just got a couple, but I'll try and be quick. First one is on parking. Am I right in saying there's no new parking permits to be issued under the proposal?
I don't think actually that is ahead of term because, because it's a care home and it's not residential dwellings as such, not C3. So there's no requirement for a permit-free agreement. I mean, there is a Section 106 agreement, obviously, but that's not one of the heads of terms.
But will the residents of the care home be allowed to apply for a permit?
Yes, there's nothing to stop them from doing so in the Section 106 agreement. I mean, there won't be once it's completed. It's obviously still in draft form.
Well, to my mind, that would sort of go against the general principle of permit-free. All the future development should be permit-free, which we've taken as a council.
Actually, I think that's a good point. I mean, I think like Councillor Bennett, I could imagine a situation where, in a somewhat artificial manner, somebody living in a care home acquired a parking permit which in practice other people used, but would it be possible to make a care home development permit free? I think legally, if it was possible, I would have thought we should.
Well, the thing is, the policy is, it talks about new dwellings as opposed to care home bedrooms. It talks about sort of additional new dwellings, sort of like, C3 dwelling houses, as opposed to care home rooms, which is why we don't have a permit-free obligation at the moment in the heads of terms. So I'm not quite sure. I mean, I suppose if members were particularly keen on it, it would have to be another obligation in the Section 106 agreement. We couldn't do it by a condition. But strictly speaking, it's not, in accordance with our policy, the way it's written.
I mean, to take an extreme example, if a large number of these residents applied, they could apply not just for a parking permit, but also for a disabled bay, I would imagine. And you wouldn't take too many of them before you've got all the parking in Allen Street.
Well, our permit-free agreements wouldn't stop disabled people from applying for a parking permit anyway. They're exempted. So, yeah, I'm not quite sure. We'll have to sort of think about that a bit further if that's the road that the members want to go down. You want to go down?
Maybe I went on a slight red herring, but I certainly think on the point of permit-free, I think that the principle of why we've brought it in would still apply in this, even if it doesn't meet the letter of the law. The spirit of the rule would be for this to be permit-free, to my mind. Yeah.
No, I would have thought if it's at all possible, then I think it maybe adding a condition, it would be the correct mechanism to do this. I don't know what the thought is on this.
Well, it couldn't be a condition. It would have to be a Section 106 obligation. But it's got to pass the tests for a Section 106 obligation. It's got to be necessary for the development to be acceptable in planning terms. And I'm not sure it would meet that test. And because it's not you know, it's not what our policy says either. So I'm just a bit concerned that the obligation just wouldn't meet the SIL tests, you know, the test for Section 106 obligations set out in the SIL regulations.
Okay. Well, you would obviously know the regulations better than I would, but to my mind, for, I mean, both in terms of parking stress, but also, perhaps more importantly, our net zero goals. And I mean, these are the reasons why we've brought in the the rule around there being no additional parking permits for new dwellings, and this would be the same principle. So it would be necessary for those reasons, to my mind. But I don't know what you think.
Sorry, I don't know what the rest of the committee think about that, but you know, I still think permit freeze for care homes. You know, they're not separate dwelling houses, so that they don't really, you know, it wouldn't really comply with the policy that we have. And yeah, I don't think they would, you know, to impose that here wouldn't comply with the test set out in the SIL regs. It's not necessary to make the development acceptable in planning terms. I'm not sure it's reasonable either.
Okay, thank you. I think the answer, colleagues, is that it's an interesting point which we've explored, but probably it's not something that legally we can actually pursue. I think we'd have to hope that, in practical terms, anyone who's going to live in a care home of this sort would actually not be seeking to have any sort of parking permit or a disabled permit. And I think that may well be where we are obliged to go. Okay. Are there any other questions to officers before we need to make a decision? Anybody? Tom, do you want to go? Well, actually, Emma, you go first, and then Tom.
I don't have any further questions. Do you want me to make a broad comment? No.
Sorry. All right, sorry.
Thank you.
In that case, Sonia, and then Tom.
And forgive me if this was already answered in response to Councillor Bennett, but objectors mentioned lack of evidence to back any assurance that there won't be significant noise disturbance. Are you satisfied with the amount of evidence that we've been given, and what kind of evidence could be provided to give more reassurance that that is the case?
Our environmental health officer is satisfied with the evidence that has been submitted, but should members wish to do so, it would be possible to add a further condition requiring a revised noise report to include a greater number of monitoring points.
On privacy, could you just, in terms of the privacy of the residents of Abingdon Court, will there be, could you remind me, will there be new overlooking of residents in Abingdon Court, and if so, to what extent?
There are, on the south elevation at the moment, there are existing windows which overlook Abingdon Court. The proposed new building would have additional windows at third floor level, and on the lower levels the building would be slightly closer to Abingdon Court. I think in paragraph 6.42 in the report, we give the distances that between the windows would decrease from 17 metres to 13.5 metres. But the windows would be relatively modest in size, and any increase in overlooking would not be significant. We're satisfied that there wouldn't be a loss of privacy.
Okay, so it's not a case of completely new views, it's a slight reduction in the distance.
That's correct, yes.
There might be slight increase, but nothing, to your mind, significant. And then, sorry for potentially flogging a dead horse, but going back to parking, I just want, if we can't prevent parking stress, I mean, equally, again, if not more important, is the air quality of the area. Would it be possible to put a condition on saying, if any parking permits are because there's potentially 40 new people, 40 new cars on the road, probably wouldn't be, but potentially, to say that it could only be sort of zero emissions sort of EV electric vehicles.
I may let Lorna answer that. I think it would be difficult that we don't have the I don't think we have the policy backing, as it were, to require that type of requirement, that type of stringent control. I will let, if any other officers
I don't really
wish
have
to add
anything
to that.
To add, we don't have a policy basis for that. We don't ask for it on any other, planning permission we've granted. It doesn't really meet the 6 tests for conditions in the NPPF. No, I'd advise against that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed. So we now have to reach a conclusion. I will start by outlining what I think is a framework of considering the planning balance in relation to this application. There are a number of different factors that have been raised by parties and also in the officer's report. I think the first one, of course, is the principle of land use. And I think here it's actually quite clear-cut. There had been a care home there, it closed, it's proposed there is a care home. That's supported in planning policies, and I think that's quite a clear-cut, must be considered a benefit of the scheme. The exact details of who might be in the care home is something that policy doesn't make particular distinctions about. The principle of a care home is supported. In terms of design and conservation, I think here there's more of a mixed picture. The officer's report and some of the representations we have been quite rude about the design and said that they don't like it, and in fact the conservation officers have gone so far as to suggest that the building constitutes less than substantial harm to the conservation area and the listed church nearby. Maybe that's quite a harsh judgment, but of course it has to be borne in mind that we have an existing building there, and so that's more of a mixed picture. The next important item is living conditions. We've had a discussion about living conditions for potential residents of the home, were it to be built out. We've also had a discussion in passing that the previous reason for refusal was focused very heavily on the daylight sunlight impact of neighbours at 16 Allen Street. Now, that essentially has been overcome by changes to the proposed massing of the building. The next subject that we need to consider is trees and landscaping. Now, here we've heard quite a lot of people say that they like the tree of heaven. That would have to be removed if this were to be granted. There is an objection from our own tree officers. On the other hand, it's proposed that there are replacement trees, so that's something that has to be weighed in the balance. We've had a discussion about transport. I think it's worth saying that I think in terms of overall highways impact and traffic generation, I think with Avon House being so near the High Street and also High Street Kensington Underground and so many bus routes, I think the amount of generation of traffic in relation to people working in a care home, I think it's reasonable to say that would be modest, but obviously visitors to the care home, clearly there would be a degree of traffic generation there. Finally, in terms of employment, clearly people would be employed in a care home. And I think, again, in terms of policy, that would have to be considered as a benefit of the scheme because there's new employment. Issues about construction and the management of construction site, essentially within the way the planning system works, these are matters that are properly dealt with by condition. So saying the demolition of a building would obviously create a lot of noise and nuisance. Unfortunately, that's not a reason to refuse planning permission. These are things dealt with by condition. So having outlined that quick framework as to how we might arrive at a decision, I invite colleagues to comment. Who'd like to go first?
Chair, could I first ask about the condition discussed around an additional noise survey? And I don't know if you or other colleagues would be supportive of that was a bit more robust and measured noise in more locations and more times of day. Probably details to be figured out at a later point with officers, but what are your views on that?
So would that mean varying one of the existing conditions? Okay, perhaps we can go back to officers because I think this is an important point. I think it's condition 20, isn't it?
Yeah. Yes, it's condition 20, but there is also condition 25, which requires that the measures outlined within the Sandy Brown report shall be implemented. So condition 25 would need to be amended along with well, I think condition 25 is the one that would need to be amended to require submission of a revised report, and then it would be the measures outlined within that revised report should be implemented in full and so maintained.
So would that make sense to you, Councillor Bennett, in terms of an adequate way of addressing this issue? Yes. Okay. And otherwise, what do you feel?
Chairman, sorry, because of that condition, if we did impose it, I mean, would it be for officers to consider and whether they'd be happy with it? I mean, you know... I
don't know what you think, Chairman, but to my mind, yes. I mean, you've heard our discussion around it reflecting more key locations around the site and times of day, but exact details to be figured out by officers would be my thought. Just more generally, well, just going through your sort of framework, Chairman, I think traffic, it's unfortunate that the policy of no new parking permits doesn't apply in this case because it's not new dwellings. But I suppose we have to take into account the fact that this is, as you said, the care home use is established. And so if it were even to come back to life in its current form, it would still have the ability for new parking permits to be issued. So that's perhaps not a reason to object or to turn it down. The double basement is a concern, but I think we have to take into account the fact that the double basement permission has already been granted and could be built tomorrow, and that is a very real consideration. Aesthetically, again, I accept the points of it's not as good as perhaps the initial proposal, but considering what's there now, I think neutral. How it's currently referred, the existing building is very generous, and a lot of comments reflect that. And then my main remaining concern was around noise, but I've feel that that change to condition can address those concerns. And yes, well, I was on the committee with you that turned down the original proposal, and I feel that those concerns around enclosure and daylight have been addressed in this proposal. So on balance, I would lean towards granting.
Okay, thank you. Other views? Emma, do you want to go next?
Thank you, Chair. There's been an awful lot to read around this. I mean, I do see the design as being incoherent. I think it's a bit of an embarrassment, actually. And sitting right next to the beautiful classical United Reformed Church, I think we could have done a lot better than Pastiche Georgian, to be honest, with a hodgepodge around the back of modern whatever. I'm not quite sure, but it is incoherent. So this less than substantial harm is sort of hanging over us like the sword of Damocles, I think. The environmental aspects I found very alarming, losing trees and the little bits of landscaping here and there that people aren't allowed to go on. They're just going to look out of their aircon posh prison looking at these little tiny terraces of land. I just think it all seems rather sad, and I do know dementia patients need to get out and breathe the air. The sub-basement, I know it's been already agreed, but it will flood. It will flood, I promise you. And then all the plant in the kitchen down there, and we're going to have everybody being evacuated. Some of our basements are still flooding now, still flooding 9 months after the last big flood, because the aquifer is very high at the moment. I have great sympathy for the neighbours, the loss of light, the sense of enclosure, the height of this building, potential overlooking, and the noise from the plant, which is going to be a constant worry. For 5 additional single bedrooms, no hanky-panky, no doubles. How miserable. I don't see any public benefit. I really don't, given all the issues that are against it. I just can't. We can do so much better in Allen Street. So I am minded to refuse.
Okay, thank you very much. Sophie.
Thank you. So, bearing in mind everything you said about the fact that we have an existing building and that the existing site is not in use and there is a need for a care home, the appearance of the proposal I think would be an upgrade on Allen Street, at least on the Allen Street front. And in response to the planning permission's refusal, the applicants have amended the building to address the concerns raised, particularly around height and bulk and daylight. I do have concerns around noise and would support an additional condition to reassure residents and provide provide more evidence that this won't cause significant noise disruption to neighbours. I did have concerns around living conditions in the care home. The applicants have confirmed that the room sizes are above average, if that's correct, above average standard room sizes for care homes in London. I think, on balance, I'm leaning towards approving.
Okay. Well, thank you for those opinions. Before we actually take a vote, I wanted to just ask a couple of points to officers and make sure we were content with this. Condition 25, we're saying that there should be, as Councillor Bennett outlined, there should be further investigations, really, to establish exactly what the noise, acoustic report is in relation to further locations, and that's something that I think we would be happy to delegate to officers. I think is that correct in
Yes, I
You're happy with that?
I think it would be the submission of a revised report to include the further measures, further testing.
Good. And I think the final point, which actually, apologies to colleagues because there's been a lot of important points to discuss, but in terms of the heads of the Section 106 agreement, I think we have a public art contribution on site or via a culture plan of 191,000. I think probably the correct way of doing this might be that we should add an informative that we would wish this quite substantial amount of money to be spent either in something relating to Kensington High Street or Holland Park, I would suggest. I don't think we should. I don't think we would want that to just disappear off somewhere into a hole. I don't know if somebody else. Well, I don't think we could allocate it to Ensil, could we? I don't think we could do that, but I'll take advice on that.
Can I ask about that? About the Section 106, Chair. Sorry.
Oh, sorry, I beg your pardon. Sorry,
Sorry, yeah, I was going to ask about that. I forgot to ask. It was in my list of questions. I forgot. Sorry. About the Section 106, that vast amount for art. I find it... Where has that come from? Because it seems, given all the other benefits that we could have had, £191,000 for art seems extraordinary. And I do know that there's a basement under this town hall where there's lots of pieces of art that haven't got a home. People have contributed over the years.
Shall I answer that? Yes, the figure comes from our planning obligations supplementary planning document, which contains formulas in effect for all of the contributions. And so that public art contribution is calculated from that adopted document.
But just to check, it would be entirely in order for us to have an informative that said we expected that substantial sum of money to be spent somewhere reasonably local, like the High Street or Holland Park. Yeah?
Obviously, yes, an informative would be advice to the applicant. At the moment, the discussions that have taken place with the applicant have been around placing the art on the site. So if the heads of terms were to be varied, then that obviously would need agreement from the applicant. I think that the terms that are set out in the report are on the site or via the culture plan.
Chairman, just to add, because it's a planning obligation. Yeah, so basically we could put something in the Section 106 agreement to say that it should be spent locally in the ward. Yeah.
Okay, right. Okay. So, colleagues, I'm sorry about that. That was the Section 106 agreement point was something I meant to ask about earlier, but we were talking about things which, in the greater scheme of things, were more important. So the recommendation in front of us is to grant permission, subject to legal agreement. I would suggest that condition 25 be reworded in the way that Councillor Bennett in particular put forward. I suggest we have an informative along the lines I've just discussed that says that the contribution to public art or the culture plan is something that should be locally focused. So with that in mind, yes, Amanda, do you want to say something?
It was just a correction to the use of the word informative. We were minded to adjust the obligation, which gives it more teeth, as opposed to the informative.
So I'm very happy to accept that change to the wording. So with that in mind, the recommendation is to grant with those amendments that we've just discussed, can I see those in favour of granting, please? Those against? So permission is granted. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.